Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on stalking. This is funded by the Office on Violence Against Women. And my name is Megan Beal. I'm a project manager for the National Sheriff's Association. We are a member-based organization representing the more than 3,000 sheriff's offices throughout the United States. And we have been lucky enough to partner with the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center on this grant. And we have Julia Holtemeyer today to present on stalking. So Julia, I'll let you get going.
Thanks so much, Megan, and thank you to the entire National Sheriff's Association for partnering with Spark today on this webinar. We are really excited. So before I jump into the content, just a reminder for webinar tech stuff and WebEx in particular. Across the top of your WebEx screen or box, you should be able to turn on closed captions yourself if you need those. And there's also a chat that you are welcome to use. My colleague from Spark, Emma, is going to be monitoring the chat and dropping in links to our website and resources and whatnot. So please feel free to use the chat to ask questions, to comment and talk with each other. And I will do my best to get to questions during the webinar and at the end, but we might have a lot, so I might not be able to get to them all, but we will see how it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so not only thanks to the National Sheriff's Association, but also to OVW, who, as Megan said, funds the project and also generally funds Spark. So the Stalking Prevention and Awareness Resource Center is funded by DOJ, Office on Violence Against Women. And this is our website. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, you can find on our website at stalkingawareness.org. So there we have guides for advocates, prosecutors, judges. We have one for law enforcement coming up very soon, but it's not there yet. We also have lots of recorded webinars. So if you want to share the type of information that you learned today, we have approximately a zillion recorded webinars on our website, and you are welcome to go there, check those out, watch webinars on different topics, and share them. We also have victim resources, and we are on social media. We absolutely encourage you to follow us if you want to follow us legally on social media, but not illegal stalking behavior, of course. So today, getting started. First of all, I want to start off by talking about definitions of stalking. So we have, at Spark, we like to talk about both behavioral definitions as well as legal and statutory definitions. So each jurisdiction within the US is going to have its own definition of stalking from its jurisdictional statutes, which would define legally define, for example, criminal stalking. It's going to vary a little bit jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but behaviorally is what we're going to start off with today to give everyone a sense of what are we really talking about when we talk about stalking. So stalking is a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear for the person's safety or the safety of others, or suffer substantial emotional distress. So there are a few different pieces there that we'll go over. One, it's a pattern of behavior. So in the chat, let me know, what do you all think counts as a pattern? How many incidents do you need in order to have a pattern of behavior? And I'll pause a moment. Some people are saying at least two or more. Someone says more than one. Someone else said 3. Basically, yes, you're all right. Congratulations. So when we talk about behavioral stalking, we generally say 2 or more, but your statute in your own state or jurisdiction may define it differently. Some say 3, some say more than 1. But generally, we're talking about 2 or more. So to have a pattern, we have a first thing, we have a second thing, and now we have a pattern. All right. Now I'm going to play a little video. All right. Is anybody scared of spiders? If you were sitting on the couch like these people and saw a spider, would you start screaming and jump up on the couch to get away from it? Or would you roll your eyes at the other person? Ooh, some people saying they love spiders. A couple of at home as pets. Very cool. Have your dog eat it. Yeah. Scream and run away. Yeah. Thank you all for being vulnerable with me and admitting some of you admitting your fears. Yeah, so how many of you might say that this reaction of the woman screaming and jumping away from the spider is overreacting? Why is she screaming? It's just a little spider. Yeah, well, the thing is, as someone just said, fear is fear. And you know, what makes one person fearful might not make another one fearful. With spiders, some of you said, yeah, I'm going to scream and run away. Some said, you know, look for something to smack it with and try to kill it. Maybe some of you would pick it up in your hands and take it outside. We all react differently to the same exact situation. And that is critical to remember in stalking cases. Because as someone just mentioned in the chat, everyone has their own reaction and why they react the way they do. We have to try to understand everyone else's perspective. Like Samantha just said, you know, I might think this person is overreacting, but that person who's screaming and scared of the spider knows only that person can explain to us why they're reacting that way. And, you know, they might not be able to explain it very clearly at the time, but they can give us the context to understand why are they screaming and running away from that spider. So really remember, it's really, really key to remember, context is critical, context is key. Something could be frightening to a stalking victim. It's not scary to you, that you are not fearful of, that doesn't frighten you, that is not scary to you, but it is to them. And often certain behaviors or certain things like the spider are scary or frightening to a victim for a very specific reason, because it has specific meaning based on the context, based on the history of the relationship that these people have had, based on something that happened to the victim previously in their life that the stalker knows about and so is playing on that fear, etc. So really looking at the context of the situation in order to understand what does that behavior, what does that spider mean to that victim. Another really key point to remember in stalking cases is that stalking criminalizes otherwise legal behavior. So it's totally legal to text somebody, but if sending 100 text messages in 2 hours is part of a stalking pattern of behavior, and that whole pattern of behavior is now criminalized stalking behavior, that means sending those text messages is now criminal behavior. And we will talk more about this. So now I want to go over a quick little case study, really, and I'll ask for more audience participation, but to talk through another example of getting the context, as you probably guessed. So this on your screen, these 3 lines are from a real police report. Victim advised on today's date at approximately 0800 hours when she got into her car to head to work, her car doors were locked and on the driver's seat was a Corona beer bottle cap. Excuse me. So, question for you. They called the police because of a beer cap? What do you want to know? If you are the dispatcher, if you are the responding officer, what more information do you want? Please go ahead and write in the chat. Why does this concern you? What's the significance of the bottle cap? What does it mean to her? Significance. Is there any damage to the car? Who else has keys? Has this been done before? Do you drink Corona? Do you drink or not? All of these are great questions. Yes, we need to get more context for the situation. Absolutely. All of these questions are questions that we want the answers to. So a little bit more information. Victim stated that yesterday she celebrated her 2-year anniversary of being sober, and she had received messages from people in her AA group congratulating her on her 2-year sobriety. She believes that the suspect placed the beer cap in her car to mess with her emotionally because seeing anything related to alcohol is a trigger to her. She believes that the suspect is monitoring her text messages as that is the only way they would know about the anniversary. Wow, now we have a lot more context. We still don't have the answers to all of the great questions that y'all wrote in the chat, and so we need to continue the conversation with this victim. But now we have a better understanding. We know that Corona is the type of beer she used to drink, that she has been 2 years sober and just celebrated that, and she thinks a specific person, she has someone in mind who would put this beer bottle cap, this Corona cap, into her car to mess with her. So we certainly need to talk with this victim more to talk about their history with this relate. Who is this suspect? How do you know them? Why do you think it's them? And also, of course, monitoring the cell phone text messages, you know, that would be a huge piece of a stalking case as well, as it's you know, if she didn't share this information, share her text login information with the suspect, you know, that would also be criminal behavior. Absolutely. So really, the main point here is to get the context of the situation from the victim, and also to remember that that victim knows a whole lot more than we do when we're just getting that phone call about there's a Corona cap on the car seat, on the seat of the car. And so that victim has all this information and we need to access that. So we need to ask questions to get the context and a whole lot more information so that we can also understand why this is so frightening. And victims really are great predictors. They have really good understandings of what would make them safe, why they feel unsafe, how dangerous the situation is, etc. So to come full circle, I will play the ending to that spider video. Oh, please play. So in this situation with the spider, one person was terrified, fearful, screaming, because she knew that that spider was capable of picking her up by the one finger, slamming her into the wall. Whereas the person who she was with didn't have the full context of the situation. All right. So that's really talking about the behavioral definition of stalking. Now to switch into the legal statutory criminal. So stalking, first and foremost, is a crime. That's why we are talking about it today in the law enforcement response, because officers and deputies respond to crimes. So Emma in the chat just posted the link to our website, a map that we have on our website of all the different current statutes. So stalking is a crime under the federal government at the federal level and federal jurisdiction, also in all 50 states, District of Columbia, all US territories, many tribal codes under the Uniform Code of Military Justice as well. So you can look at all of those on our website, look for yours, and we also have a kind of a summary that compares some information across jurisdictions. So when you are looking at your own jurisdiction statute, a couple of things to keep in mind as we started off talking about what is a pattern of behavior. Statutes often define the number of incidents required to count as a course of stalking, course of conduct, as that pattern of behavior. Might be more than one, might be two, might be three, etc. Sometimes the statutes also define fear, reasonable fear. The person has to actually feel fear, emotional distress. Does the victim have to state that they're fearful, etc.? And some statutes also require that the stalker intentionally or knowingly caused fear, which some people may find intimidating if you have to prove that the stalker knew it, when the stalker is going to say, "Oh no, I had no idea." But actually, it's not all that hard to prove that they intentionally or knowingly caused fear, because if I know that you're terrified of spiders and then I send you something scary about spiders, if you can show that I knew about it, that I knew about your fear and I'm preying on that fear, you can show that intentionality. Similarly, if I am calling you and texting you multiple times, 10 times, 100 times within a couple days, why am I not stopping? Do I do that to everyone? Or am I intentionally calling you back again and again and again and again, etc.? Yeah. And again, remember that all statutes criminalize behaviors that are legal otherwise as a single incident when not part of a stalking pattern of behavior, but also behaviors within the course of conduct may already be criminal in and of themselves. So, if property damage, slashing someone's tires, it's illegal to do on its own. It's also, if it's part of a stalking pattern of behavior, it's still illegal. Yeah. Now, we'll talk about this more later, but just as a quick intro, it's important to identify and name stalking for a variety of reasons. One reason is that it can be really helpful to use stalking as a criminal charge in prosecution, basically. So because if you're going to be proving a stalking charge, you have to prove the course of conduct. And so as you're allowed to bring in all this evidence that's part of the course of conduct. So it permits the admission of a wide range of evidence and other bad acts, and allows you to then provide context for why was this so scary, and provide context for other criminal charges that you might be bringing at the same exact time, whether property damage, DV, witness intimidation, etc. All right, so stalking prevalence. Does anyone know how many people in the US are stalked, men, women, over the year, over their lifetime? Does anyone happen to know that? Please go ahead and write in the chat, or really, how often do you see stalking charges? So based on what you see in your work, what would you think the prevalence is? Yeah, so some people are getting it exactly right. 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men. And those numbers, 1 in 3 women experience domestic violence over her lifetimes, 1 in 4 women experience sexual assault over their lifetimes. So 1 in 3 women experiencing stalking is right up there, similar prevalence to domestic violence, sexual assault, these violence against women crimes, the VAWA crimes. So we know men can be victims too, clearly, 1 in 6 men. We don't hear about stalking as much. It doesn't get identified as much. It doesn't get charged as much, but it happens a whole lot. So generally, when you're looking at a stalking case, women are more likely than men to experience stalking, as we just saw from the prevalence data. The majority of victims report that their offender is male. 18 to 24-year-olds experience the highest rates of stalking among adults, and the majority of victims know their offender. So here we see data for female and male victims, and you can see that the vast majority of stalkers and their victims know each other before the stalking happens. Their current or former intimate partners, their acquaintances, those are each around 40%. And then we have some stranger cases, brief encounters, family members, people in authority. So though, we often a lot of people have this idea in their head of stalkers, like celebrity stalkers. You don't know the person or something, or it's someone who you met once and then they aren't taking no for an answer. And yes, that does happen, but really you can see in the vast majority of the time, the victim knows the stalker. So, yes, so a couple of questions here in the chat. One person is asking about stalking in the context of domestic partners, and we are going to talk about this more, but absolutely stalking and intimate partner violence can happen at the same time. And so as Trish mentioned in the chat, if one partner is tracking the other's car, monitoring text messages and emails on the phone, etc., if there's a pattern of behavior directed at that specific spouse that would cause that spouse or a reasonable person in their position to feel fear or emotional distress, it's stalking. It's intimate partner violence, it's domestic violence, and it's also stalking. Absolutely. And it's often, stalking is often considered as part of coercive control, as part of the power and control in an intimate partner violence situation and relationship. And yes, that's true. It is another tactic of power and control, of coercive control. But it's important to name that it is stalking, and it's very useful to charge stalking. And I'll get into some of the reasons for that. So why do people stalk? Someone just asked a question about mindset, similar to DV offenders. So why do people stalk? Sometimes it's because they're seeking affection. Sometimes it's the same type of DV power and control that we talk about. Rejection, if they were rejected, if they're obsessed with a person. Sometimes it's because they're planning to commit a crime. So if I am planning to sexual assault a specific person, I might be stalking them ahead of time so that I know their routine, know where they live, can figure out when they're going to be alone, what would scare them, etc., or how to threaten or intimidate them. But ultimately, last one on the list, because they get away with it. And we are all here today in order to get better at identifying stalking, in order to then support the victims and hold offenders accountable so that they stop being able to get away with it. So in order to be able to better identify stalking, we use the SLY framework because stalkers are sly, but instead of SLY, what I mean here is SLII. The SLY framework. The SLY framework we use to basically group all those different incidents that combine to form a stalking course of conduct. How can we categorize them? And here we have the SLY framework that Dr. T.K. Logan came up with to basically categorize those behaviors into 4 different buckets. We have surveillance, life invasion, intimidation, and interference through sabotage or attack. Now, surveillance is the one that most people think of, and that you most often see in movies and TV. You know, it's following, it's watching, it's waiting, showing up in person, or using technology like tracking software, find my friends or find my iPhone using AirTags, or just monitoring someone's social media activity, for example. But it also includes getting information about the victim, and proxy stalking, which is using somebody else in order to stalk that person. So if I'm at work, or if I have a protection order against, against me from my victim, or for whatever reason, I think it would be more scary to have a different person actually stalking, then I go find somebody else to stalk my victim, and that's proxy stalking or third-party stalking. So it could be calling up a neighbor and saying, "Hey, did Julia get home last night?" And the neighbor just thinks that my stalker is being friendly, and worried about my safety because we have snow and ice on the roads, but actually they're using someone else to stalk me. And it could that third party could either, like that example, not know about it, or they could be in on it. They could say, "Yeah, I'm gonna go to the grocery store and wait in the parking lot, and then I'll tell you when they show up because I agree with you and think what you're doing is fine." So it happens both ways. All right, so surveillance. Our next slide category is life invasion. So this is invading the victim's life, unwanted contact, whether that is phone calls or text messages, or showing up in person at home, work, school, the gym, the grocery store, daycare center, whatever it is. Property invasion, public humiliation, spreading rumors online, or posting humiliating, shameful, embarrassing information on the internet, or going old school and printing out flyers and putting it up throughout the community or at the gym that the victim goes to, for example. Also harassing friends and family. We know lots of stalkers do not stop at only stalking the victim. They actually also start harassing friends and family, children, pets, people who are important to the victim as well, because it's all ultimately targeting the victim. But if the stalker knows things that are important to the victim, of course they'll use other people, pets, etc. as well. Intimidation certainly can be direct threats, can also be indirect, implicit threats. It doesn't have to be actually stating, "I threaten to do this to you." It could be, "Well, that would be a really bad idea. You wouldn't want such and such to happen, etc. Wouldn't it be a shame if," things like that. Property damage, symbolic violence are often used as tactics of intimidations, forced confrontations in public or private, making a scene, threats to harm. So stalkers often threaten to harm themselves or others. Really powerful tactics of intimidation. And the final slide category is interference through sabotage or attack. So here we have some examples. Sabotaging someone financially or their employment, ruining their reputation professionally or personally, interfering with custody or other support services, keeping them from leaving, attacking, and road rage are all common stalking behaviors that fit into this interference through sabotage or attack category. And now I also want to remind everyone that all of these slide categories and behaviors we've talked about can basically happen in person or through technology, online or through other technologies. So remember that. And most stalking victims do experience both in-person stalking and technology-facilitated stalking. So tech-facilitated stalking Here I have those 4 SWI categories with examples of tech-facilitated stalking. So smart home devices, tracking software, and devices can all be used for surveillance, monitoring activity, recording devices. Again, life invasion, that contact can be online or using some technology, hacking and controlling accounts. Intimidation, threats can be online. That would be tech-facilitated stalking, or making threats online or through technology, or making threats to use technology in order to do something. And intimidation through sabotage or attack would be spreading rumors online or publicly posting personally identifiable information, doxing, swatting, prank calling emergency services, posting private photos, videos, or information online, whether they are real or fake, or even just using technology to encourage others to harm the victim. Now, when you're thinking about stalking patterns of behavior, we know that 2/3 of stalkers pursue their victim at least once per week. More than 75% use more than one means of approach, and that weapons are used to threaten or harm victims in about 20% of cases, or a fifth. So basically, it happens frequently and in a lot of different ways. Stalkers tend, as these numbers show, to not only call and do text messages, but also to show up, to send gifts, to do proxy stalking, to threaten, all of these behaviors. Many, many different behaviors make up a pattern. And particularly when thinking about the law enforcement response to stalking, it is really, really critical to name and identify all of the different crimes that are happening in a pattern of behavior. So 2/3 of stalkers pursue the victim at least once per week. So there might be a different crime each week that you can charge, essentially, in addition to the entire criminal stalking charge. So we often see identity theft, vandalism, property crimes, voyeurism, privacy violations, witness intimidation, trespassing, non-consensual recording. All of these are very common crimes that we see stalkers use in their course of conduct. So when a victim is reporting to law enforcement and working with law enforcement, remember, there are lots and lots of charges you can include, and it's important to include all of the different crimes that a stalker has committed in order to hold them accountable for everything that they've done. In particular, I want to call out domestic violence and sexual violence intersecting with stalking. So certainly for law enforcement, also for advocates and other folks, remember that victims are unlikely to show up and say, "Hi, my name is Julia. I'm a victim of domestic violence and stalking." No, that's not how we talk about things. Victims may not think that what's happening to them is stalking. They may not really know what stalking is. They may not want to call it domestic violence, but we know that domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking often happen in the same situation. And so it's really important to ask survivors about co-occurring victimizations. And we will get into how to ask about stalking. So now I'm going to switch specifically into talking a little bit about stalking and intimate partner violence. Now, there have been a few different studies done about how much do law enforcement officers and agencies identify when stalking is happening. So here we have 3 different studies that each looked at different law enforcement agencies, and either through the reports from a certain period of time or whatnot, looked through the data to say, okay, for example, in this first one on the left, 1,200 incidents of domestic violence. Officers only arrested for stalking in 2 of those incidents of domestic violence, but the researchers identified 45 incidents which had evidence of stalking. So that meant out of 45 that researchers said, hey, the officers could have arrested for stalking by the officers' own reports that they documented, only 2 incidents actually had stalking arrests. Similarly, in the second one, roughly 1,800 incidents of domestic violence. Researchers poured through those reports, read them, and they identified nearly 300 reports that had evidence of stalking where officers could have arrested for stalking. Officers only had arrested once. And similarly, 3,756 calls for service for stalking. Of all of those calls for service, only 66 generated actual stalking incidents reports and 0 resulted in arrest for stalking. So this is really to show why we're doing this webinar. It's because we need to have officers be better able to identify stalking and charge for it. And I want to be clear also, this is not only, I hope you don't think I'm picking on police here. We see the same issue with prosecutors, judges, and juries, and advocates, and corrections, and pick any profession that you want. And everybody needs more training in how to identify stalking. And so that's what we're doing today. And really, sometimes we say at Spark that stalking is where the domestic violence field has a field, is where the domestic violence field was 20, 30 years ago. Even if you look at this power and control wheel, which is a very common tool for understanding intimate partner violence. So we have physical and sexual violence on the outside, and then within the circle, we have all of these different ways that abusers exert power and control over their victims. And yet, stalking is not listed in this. But if you think about those sly behaviors can be used to isolate, for emotional abuse, to intimidate, denying, minimizing, blame. So stalking can be part of every single one of these, but we haven't historically named it as such. So anytime you are working with an intimate partner violence situation, ask yourself, is there a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person fear? You might have stalking as well. And this is particularly important in intimate partner violence situations because more than any other type of stalker, more than any other type of relationship between the stalker and victim, current or former intimate partners who are stalkers are more likely than other stalkers to physically approach the victim, to interfere, insult, and threaten, to use weapons, to quickly escalate their behavior, and to reoffend. In short, these are really scary offenders. These intimate partner stalkers are dangerous. There was a study that looked at intimate partner femicides, which is intimate partner violence homicides, where a male partner killed or attempted to kill the female partner. And in 85% of attempted and 76% of those completed homicides, stalking occurred in the year prior to the attack. So we know stalking is a red flag. That's why we really want to be able to identify and name stalking so that we can say, wow, this is a big red flag. This victim is in danger and needs our help. And this offender, we really need to hold them accountable. So another way of saying that is that stalking is a lethality risk. So here we have the top 10 risk factors for intimate partner femicide and intimate partner violence. The top 10 risk factors for intimate partner homicide when one intimate partner kills another. Direct access to guns, threatening the victim with a weapon, strangulation, sexual assault, controlling behaviors, threats to harm, abuse of the victim while pregnant, perpetrating stalking, jealousy, and substance abuse. So perpetrating stalking leads to is a risk factor for intimate partner homicide. We see a threefold increase in risk when stalking is present. And the most common use of the criminal justice system before those intimate partner homicides was reporting the partner stalking. So we really need to work on identifying and naming the stalking so that we can support victims and hold the offenders accountable. So how do we do that? Well, we have 4 questions for officers as well as advocates and others to use to identify, is stalking happening? Now, you may notice that these 4 questions align perfectly with these SLY categories, those SLY behaviors. First, we have surveillance. Has the offender been tracking, following, or monitoring the victim in any way? Then we have life invasion. Has the offender repeatedly invaded the victim's life or privacy by initiating unwanted contact? What's the next one? Interference through sabotage or attack. Has the offender significantly and directly interfered with the victim's life? For example, physical or sexual assault, forcibly keeping the victim from leaving, holding them against their will, causing a serious accident, assaulting others, etc. Or, and the last one, intimidation. Has the offender more than one time intimidated or scared the victim through threats, property damage, threatening or actual harming of pets, or other means? So if you think about those 4 SLY behaviors, you can also then think about the 4 SLY behavior screening questions to identify stalking. And I am reading some of the things in the chat. Identifying trauma is a big thing, and having an appropriately trauma-informed response. We all certainly need to work on that. Yeah, and stalking in the media portrayal and generally what we think of as stalking is not necessarily what's actually happening in reality. And in stalking cases, we're often asking the victim to provide the evidence, especially in the criminal system, which is putting, because victims are the ones who have access to all of that evidence and the course of conduct and all the text messages and phone calls and whatnot. But unfortunately, then it is putting more of that work on them. So in addition, but for these screening questions, we have these 4 questions. And if the answers to any of those 4 questions about the SLY behaviors, SLY behavior categories are yes, then the next step is asking, how did this make you feel? Have you made any changes in your life because of these SLY behaviors, the stalking course of conduct? Did something make you afraid or concerned? A lot? A little? Not at all? These are all questions for officers to ask. So I mentioned the fact that stalking in intimate partner situations, causes an increase in intimate partner homicide, a risk in, oh my gosh, sorry, let me start over with that. Stalking causes an increase in the risk of intimate partner homicide. So we need to be able to identify stalking and assess the risk. And really, number one, I want to point out victim perceptions are really great predictors. Victims know are really good at guessing, I should say, what's going to happen next. Often better than risk management tools even. Sorry about that. So if your law enforcement agency or support agency already uses a risk assessment, you can take those 4 stalking screener questions and the follow-ups and add them to your already existing risk assessment that you're using. Or if you're looking for a full stalking risk assessment, I encourage you to look at coercivecontrol.org. Dr. T.K. Logan, again, has created the Stalking and Harassment Assessment and Risk Profile, the SHARP. And basically, SHARP is an online form that a victim or a victim working with an officer, a prosecutor, an advocate, anyone can fill out online, and it asks you all about stalking behaviors. Ask you what's been going on, for how long, etc. And then basically after filling out this form, it creates 2 documents for you. One is a summary of everything that you typed in. That's a narrative report and a risk profile that going through certain risk factors. And the other is the safety planning resource full of safety planning suggestions saying, hey, you mentioned this is happening, you know, consider these safety planning things. Now, I want to make sure to tell you all that as an online form that you can access through a web browser, SHARP does not save any of the information that you create. You put it all in, you type it in, click it in on your phone, it creates these reports, and then you have to save those reports somewhere, or else they're going to disappear. SHARP does not save them. You have to save them. Now, the risk factors and the risk profile that SHARP looks at, it looks at 14 risk factors, and this is based off of Dr. Logan's research showing what the big 14 risk factors are in stalking cases. So it looks at the course of conduct. Has there been any escalation? Might there be some triggers coming up? What have been triggers in the past? It also looks at the nature and the context of threats. Have threats been made and followed through with before? It also looks at stalker history, the stalker mindset, and victim vulnerability. So as someone mentioned, there are also plenty of other things in victims' lives that can make a victim even more vulnerable. Stalker mindset, I want to point out here, resistance and persistence. So we talk about how victims resist the stalking behavior. If someone texts me 100 times and that is unwanted contact, I can resist by not responding to any of those 100 text messages. That stalker has persisted because they are sending 101, 102, 103 text messages. So I'm resisting, they are persisting. And it's important to look at that in a stalking case. Now, what is the impact of stalking? It's important to consider as we are supporting victims. It's also really critical to look at the impacts of stalking in a law enforcement investigation, getting the context of the situation. Here, there's a quote up here from a research article, but generally, it's easier for people to see stalking as mild trauma because there's often no or little physical harm or threats. But stalking victims have that fear of what's going to happen next. This person is invading my life. I am resisting the contact. They are persisting in this pattern of behavior and I can't get away from them. And so stalking victims feel this urgency. They're hypervigilant. They want this to stop. But others around them tend to minimize it and don't see that same sense of urgency as, say, in an assault or even victims of domestic violence. But what we know is that stalkers, particularly intimate partner offenders, stalkers, are very dangerous, and we need to take the stalking situation seriously. It's a big red flag. And so what are victims afraid of? A lot of stalking victims are simply afraid. They say, I don't know what's going to happen next, and that terrifies me. What are they going to do? Also bodily harm, the fact that the behavior may never stop, harm to a child, losing their own freedom, death, losing one's mind. Victims are afraid of a whole lot of different things. And it's great to ask them, what do you think might happen next? Asking victims, very important piece of an investigation. And remember that victims cope with trauma and with stalking specifically in a variety of ways. There's no one way that you know a victim is going to react. There's no reaction that you can use to gauge, oh, this person's lying or this person's telling the truth. Some victims get angry and move against the stalker, yelling, screaming, cursing, somehow retaliating. Some move inwards and isolate themselves from friends, family, the world, the stalker, and just kind of hide. Some try to leave the situation, moving away. A lot of stalking victims relocate to try to get away from the stalker. Some try to pacify the stalker, and they actually move towards the stalker to say, hey, basically, I'm trying to get you to stop what you're doing, so I'm going to try to pacify you. I'm going to try to stop your behavior by seeing what I can do to mollify you. And also some victims move outward, by which we mean asking for help, asking friends, family, calling up a DV agency, a sexual assault hotline, calling the police, doing something to try to get help. Now, anytime that you are working with a stalking victim, we always would encourage you to advise disengagement. So ideally, the victim would stop engaging and have no contact with the stalker. That's because stalkers tend to see any type of interaction as positive. So if my stalker calls me 35 times and I don't pick up, and on the 36th time I pick up and I say, I hate you, I never want to hear from you again, I've already told you this, don't call me, stop it. Though, even though I said all those words, really what sticks in the mind of the stalker is, oh, I called 36 times and she picked up. I'm forcing her to engage with me. She can't ignore me anymore. I'm still relevant. I have this power and control over her. So any type of engagement then reinforces the stalker's belief of, hey, I want to engage with this person. And if I do things enough, they will engage with me. Now, yes, I said all of that. Also, it's key to remember that most of the time, victims can't simply stop. They often engage with the stalker in order to keep themselves safe. Now, this may be to minimize threats, to know where they are, to negotiate. It may be a safety strategy. You know, for example, there was a victim who, was being stalked by this person, and sometimes the victim would call their stalker when they got off work, and they'd be on the phone with them for hours. And now, if you don't know the context of the situation, you or the criminal justice system, police, advocates, whoever it is, could think to themselves, well, how could it really be stalking? How could it really be that bad if this victim is calling their stalker and staying on the phone with them for 2 hours? How can it be that bad? Well, going back to the very beginning, we need to get the context. of the situation. We need to ask the victim, what's going on? Why'd you do that? What did you fear was going to happen? What was going through your mind? How did you feel? And when we ask those questions, then we find out the victim said, well, when they get off work, I want to know, are they driving home and going to bed in their house? Or are they going to show up at my house and bang on my door and try to break it down, wake my kids up yelling and screaming outside? So that victim is actually engaging with their stalker in order to know where they are, what they're doing, and to safety plan appropriately. And possibly even to mollify the stalker by saying, yeah, I'm on the phone with you, I'm listening to you, I'll talk to you until you fall asleep, and then I'll hang up. But that's all in order to protect themselves and their family, their children, their pets, the people they live with, their community, their neighbors, etc. And so getting that context is key to understanding the engagement, and you can then still show that this is part of a pattern of behavior directed at a specific person, etc. It doesn't negate the fact that there's still stalking happening. In fact, that engagement may help you show that this victim really is terrified of the stalker. So there was a question about engagement impacting the legal response. And really my response to that question is get the context of the situation. Because just because a victim is contacting the stalker does not mean that stalking is therefore not happening. This is a quote from a victim. If you've never been in a predator type situation, it's better to know where they're at than to not know. The reason I didn't block him was to help not being caught off guard. So if a victim gets a new phone number, blocks the offender from calling them or texting them or contacting them on social media, doesn't read their emails, some victims may say, no, I do not want to hear from them ever at all. I'm done. Others may say, no, you know what? I want to know how many times a day they call me. I want to see the text messages so that I know when they're in the neighborhood. Depends on the victim, depends on the situation. It's really important to help victims safety plan. Safety planning is an individualized plan that identifies specific strategies and interventions that may increase safety. This is something that victim advocates are trained to do. So law enforcement, whenever working with stalking victims, absolutely, I encourage you to engage your victim advocates, particularly to help with safety planning. Also just to provide support to victims that law enforcement, are not trained to provide, and they're there to do investigations. And on our website, actually, stalkingawareness.org, we have a guide, a short guide resource to help folks working with stalking victims safety plan. The basics of safety planning, you always want to trust victims. It's going to have to evolve over time. It's important to not only think about what has happened in the past, but what the victim thinks may happen in the future. And also to anticipate, what is the stalker going to do if the victim does this? If I change my phone number, do you think that the stalker is just going to stop trying to call me and text me? But they might actually show up at my house. They might show up at my job. They might show up at my kids' soccer game. So if the victim does something, think about anticipating the stalker's reaction. It's also really helpful for stalking victims for themselves, as well as for law enforcement investigations, for victims to track stalking incidents. So also on our website, we have a template stalking incident and behavior log. And we have this in Spanish and English. And Emma dropped the link in, as well as the link to the safety planning document. And really, this is a basic table saying, what's the date, what's the time, briefly what happened, where did it happen, is there any evidence or any witnesses. And it's also key to remember that if you are asking victims to do this and to track in, a table and a log what different stalking incidents that happen, make sure that they know that if the stalking case ever goes to court or, gets charged, this log could end up as evidence, which means the stalker could see it. So nothing in this log nothing should be included in this log that the victim wouldn't want the stalker to see. For example, how they felt about certain incidents, what really scared them, etc. Okay, so now I've been talking for a long time, thanks all for sticking with me, about what is stalking, identifying stalking, supporting victims. I'm going through that background, foundational information. Now we're going to talk a little bit about more specifically the law enforcement response, starting with identifying stalking on calls for service. And as a reminder, all of these questions, information, everything on the slides that I'm going to share with you is also available on our website. And we have handy guides and tip sheets and whatnot for law enforcement that have the same information. So, when stalkers call and report stalking, they are very unlikely to say, "Hi, my name is Julia, I'm being stalked." Let me provide you with all the evidence of that. No, stalking victims are actually more likely to say something like, "My ex is being weird. Somebody's harassing me. My neighbor's being creepy." Or even, "I know it sounds crazy, but I think my ex put a Corona beer bottle cap on the passenger seat of my car and they don't have keys, and this is why it's scary to me," etc. So remember, if you hear someone say, "I know it sounds crazy, but," or someone is talking about an ex, a neighbor, a current partner, harassing them, being creepy, getting weird, your antenna should go off for stalking. So think about, first, identifying whether or not there's a course of conduct. Do you have a pattern of behavior? Are there any protection order violations? Is there harassment, sexual assault, sexual harassment, theft, burglary? All of these things, if law enforcement, when you get a call for these things, and a call for service, you've identified that any of these things are happening, consider stalking. So you need to get the context of the situation, as we talked about. If someone left flowers with a card that says, "I'll never let you go," that could be really sweet and romantic, or that could sound like a serial killer. You got to get the context of the situation to figure out what is going on. So there might be a specific meaning to the victim of these flowers. It may be intended to seem normal, nice, romantic, benign to anybody else. And so nobody believes the victim. They think they're going crazy, etc. So really, really important to talk to victims and get the context of the situation and how it made them feel. Also, of course, always important to do suspect interviews. And remember that stalkers are going to try to argue that their behavior is legitimate. "Oh, I'm just driving down the street. That's not illegal." Yeah, you're right. But is this on your way to work? Or are you just driving down this person's street in order to threaten them as part of your stalking course of conduct? How many times did you drive by the house? Is it really on your route? Etc. Getting the context. So now more information and literally suggested questions to ask on different calls for service, harassment, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc. This is on our website. It's a few pages long and really helpful for officers. And also Emma just dropped the link to our page of the website that has this and many other resources listed. So also when law enforcement, if an officer on an initial call or doing a follow-up investigation, if something has set off your antenna or a red flag of, I think stalking might be happening here, I need to identify it, ask about sly behaviors. And here we have a resource that we created that lists out questions to ask about surveillance, life invasion, intimidation, and interference through sabotage or attack. And so this helps you identify which stalking behaviors, if any, are happening. We also have a whole long guide about investigations and report writing. So this is even more questions to ask, key points to remember when officers are doing stalking investigations, and really a list of questions to ask and things to do. So encourage officers to look at that and share it with colleagues. Now, when doing an investigation, the resources that I just mentioned are useful reminders for what to be doing when supporting a victim, doing an investigation or responding to a call. But really big picture, the big picture for officers investigating and responding to stalking is, remember to evaluate the big picture. You want to describe what's happening, not just, the single incident that happened, the one call for service about slashed tires, or about one harassing incident, or about a Corona beer bottle cap on the inside of someone's locked car. Yeah, it's describing those individual incidents, but also the entire course of conduct, that entire pattern of behavior. And so pulling all the incidents into a timeline, into a picture to get the context. Also really, really important to document, how did the victim feel? What was their response to these individual incidents, to this stalking course of conduct? And finally, to contextualize, particularly the threats. What's the context of the situation that helps us understand why the stalker did what they did and why the victim reacted the way they did? So when officers are responding to victims, remember that first contact is critical. Victims, especially stalking victims, are used to other people minimizing, to not believing them. That includes friends and families, as well as support services and officers. So remember that how you respond can really have a big impact in whether they decide to continue working with the system or not. Have resources on hand. You can actually request brochures from Spark and we'll mail them to you. We also just have them on our website so you all can print them yourselves. Also, if you have little like resources that you can bring, maybe a victim rights card or a brochure to a local DV agency that supports stalking victims, whether or not they are also experiencing co-occurring intimate partner violence. And Emma, thank you, in the chat posted links for looking at our brochures, both to order them and to print them yourselves. Or I encourage you to look at them before you order them from us. Please do. Also key, of course, to preserve evidence. Right now, screenshots of call logs and text messages, social media, monitor social media interactions, etc. And also remember that stalking is a course of conduct. Stalking happens over a very long period of time, and so your investigation is going to take a long time too. So when doing a stalking investigation, really officers want to start at the beginning. What's the relationship? How do the victim and suspect know each other? And it's important to ask both of them these questions because you might get very different answers. The victim might say, yeah, we've had a couple classes together, we've hung out in groups. I don't know, they kind of have asked me to hang out a few times, but I wasn't really interested, so I just kind of kept putting them off. And the suspect might say, oh, we're seriously dating, I think I'm going to marry her. You want to get both people's thoughts on what is happening and what their relationship is. It's also really vital to get a baseline for the relationship, the contact, how they communicated with each other, how often, etc. So, for example, typical contact. So this is setting the baseline. I have some friends who text message me. I might get 50 text messages from them in one day, and that's totally normal because that's how they send text messages, and we go back and forth. I have other friends who probably send me one birthday text a year. Otherwise, they just call me. Some people prefer emails. It's you have to know what's normal, what's the baseline, in order to then know when does this become abnormal, when has this contact communication changed for the relationship. Also key to, really important to ask the victim, do they think that the suspect knows the victim doesn't want them to be doing this? So again, we have on our website lists in that investigative and report writing guide, we have lists of lots and lots of questions to ask, including all of these context questions. So you're trying to set the baseline. How do you know each other? How do you describe your relationship? Has it changed over time? What's typical, contact and communication look like in the relationship? So again, lists of questions. I'm not going to go through all of these. They are in the guides for officers so that you can use, when doing an actual investigation. But again, remember to ask both the victim and the offender some of these questions. Also, when talking with suspects, it's often really helpful to just ask them, tell me how what you're doing is being misunderstood. They're going to want to explain to you why what they're doing is totally fine. Now, as an officer, you're not going to be agreeing with them or not agreeing or disagreeing with them. You're just getting information. You're trying to get them to talk so that you have more evidence and a better understanding. And when you are investigating a stalking course of conduct, remember to name all of the other crimes that are co-occurring and interconnected with that stalking course of conduct. And there are so many crimes that we see. There might be blackmail, there might be witness intimidation, false reports, non-consensual recording, kidnapping, cruelty to animals, domestic violence, sexual assault, burglary. I can go on and on and on, but the victim is not going to be calling law enforcement and listing out the statutory codes. No, it's the officer's responsibility and their understanding of the criminal code, of the criminal justice system to say, oh, protection order violation, we can charge that as a crime. Oh, assault, we can charge that as a crime. Oh, property damage, we can charge that as a crime, as well as the entire stalking course of conduct. So documenting the victim's response is really, really key. So documenting officers asking victims and other people, getting evidence, not only victims stating that they felt fearful, frightened, angry, upset, whatever those emotions are that they name, that's very important, but also documenting evidence that shows how did they respond to the stalking situation. Did they move? Did they get a protection order? Did they buy and install a security camera? Did they change their phone number? Did they ask colleagues to walk them to their car or the bus stop because they didn't feel safe walking alone? All of these things would be evidence of how a victim felt, even if they didn't say at the time, "Hi, my name is Julia and I am in fear of my stalker who is doing those things." That's useful if the victim does say that, but also incredibly important to document. How did I as a victim change my life? So certainly asking the victim, can you tell me what your emotional response was? Oh, you said it scared you? Okay, what about it scared you? What did you think was going to happen next? What did you think might happen? All of these are really, really important. So asking open-ended questions is also really helpful to giving victims the space to describe how they feel. How has this experience, how has it made you feel? Can you tell me what it's been like for you? What have you done to protect yourself? What has changed in your life because of this stalking situation? What did you think was going to happen if you didn't make these changes? So all of these are ways to just get that victim talking, getting them to articulate how they felt, and helping you as the officer to document that fear. Documenting evidence of accommodations made to victims' lives can be used as evidence of fear or evidence of the impact on a victim's life. So if they've changed their account settings from public to private, again, if they installed any security cameras, have they spent money on safety accommodations? Have they had to deal with identity theft, damaged property, all of these things. So again, this is a long list of possible changes victims may have made to their life in order to deal with the stalking situation. Screening phone calls, moving, trying to keep their address or location or employment or school a secret. Changing phone numbers, email addresses, social media accounts and handles, blocking others, changing device settings, even time accessing support services or time getting a protective order. Those are not easy things to do. That's not a minimal amount of time that a victim would be spending. That shows the situation is serious. If I, as a victim, want to go file for a protection order, if I am accessing support services, these all show that it has deeply impacted my life as a victim. Asking for help, changing a routine or a method of transport, avoiding, if I used to go to a yoga class every Wednesday at 6 p.m., but my stalker knew that, and so they started going to that same yoga class, or they started waiting for me afterwards, now I'm not going to my yoga class anymore. That's evidence of a change I have made to my life because of the stalker's behavior. And all of this is important to document as evidence. In addition to life changes or accommodations, it's important for officers to corroborate the victim's fear or emotional impact. So sometimes victims will ask others to screen calls at work, or to work different hours, or to work in a different office location. Maybe to ask for support or special accommodations from daycare, school, an apartment building. Really other people who they talk to. All of this is evidence that officers can use to corroborate the situation. It's also very important for officers to contextualize the threat. So, I mentioned before how dangerous and threatening intimate partner stalkers are compared to others. It's important really not only to get the context of the victim situation, but to contextualize the offender as well. So the suspect, the stalker, who are they and what are they capable of? Have they followed through on previous threats? Do they have any criminal or non-criminal but violent history? Are they tech whiz? Or are they not a tech expert, but know how to use Facebook and so can monitor and track their victim through Facebook. It's just important, again, to document these things. Look at the stalker as well. And to document the threats. Certainly, the more detailed and graphic a threat is, if there's a plan for the threat, that is very different than a general threat. So saying, for example, I'm going to kill you might cause a different level of fear than I am going to kill you with my baseball bat and bury you in the woods on that hill we used to go to. Very, very different. One has a plan. And of course, also important for law enforcement to document how the threats are communicated. So, again, all this information is captured in different resources on our website, and we actually have more that are coming out soon. But really, in addition to the law enforcement officer response, think about agency-wide. Does your agency have a stalking policy? If stalking is happening in the context of intimate partner violence, is it identified? What about though if it's not? What if it's acquaintances or friends? Property crimes instead of person crimes? How good is your agency at identifying stalking when it's happening in these different situations? So resources, Emma posted the links in the chat, but here are some more, really. So that first one is the Spark website page that lists all the resources we think would be useful to law enforcement. And I will tell you there are more coming. We have a guide, we have an agency model policy, we have a training resource, all of which will be coming out soon. They're not yet on the website, but we do have great resources up there. We also have a guide and some resources for corrections officers. I mentioned at the beginning that we have a huge number of webinars recorded and posted on our website. So that's in our training archive, stalking brochure. That website's up there that I mentioned. I also want to highlight the Institute for Community Coordinated Response. Spark worked with them to create a series of law enforcement roll call training videos. So we have a series of short videos designed to be short so that they can be used during law enforcement roll call meetings. And it's a brief introduction to stalking and then, investigations or how to interview victims, things to look for, stalking investigations, the sly behaviors, etc. And so those are a great way to get the conversation, started about how to respond to stalking as law enforcement officers and agencies. A few other resources that I want to mention. IACP's Cyber Center is useful for officers and assists police, chiefs, sheriffs, commanders, patrol officers, etc. Really anyone provides support for crimes involving technology. And as we all now know, stalking victims most often experience stalking both in person and through technology. NNEDV, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, has a great app that is very useful for victims in particular on tech safety. So it's this app that kind of walks victims through many of the different ways that technology might be used to abuse them, to stalk them, to hurt them. And this helps victims take protective action. NCJFCJ has a great guide on how to gather tech abuse evidence for court. Certainly recommend that. And really, I'm going through some of these different resources because stalking requires everybody to work together in order to really support victims and hold offenders accountable. And we call this a coordinated community response, which means that police are talking to victim services, are talking to prosecutors, are talking to courts, are talking to medical professionals, are talking to culturally specific support services. So really getting all the different folks who might be working with a victim or offender, getting those people to talk to each other in order to better support victims and hold offenders accountable. So we're pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to mention that on our website, we have a guide for prosecutors. And so you can read that, share that with your prosecutor partners. And Equitas, of which Spark is one project, is an organization that supports prosecutors, including in responding to stalking as well as other crimes. So you can contact us with any questions. Similarly, advocates on the call or officers on the call who want to deepen your relationship with advocates and make sure that prosecutors, advocates, judges, corrections, everyone is thinking about stalking, you can send advocates our guide to stalking for advocates. We also have a response checklist for organizational response and a few other things like that. Really, I'm pointing all of this out again to say, hey, responding to stalking requires working with other people. You can't do it all on your own. And so check out our website in order to find resources for all of the different groups of people who need to be working together in order to better support victims and hold offenders accountable. And Emma is dropping links into the chat as well. One question that I see is a little bit more about the model policy. So we, not yet, but soon we'll have a law enforcement model policy on stalking. So it will be a policy and an associated guide that explains why we included things in the policy that we did. That's an agency model policy that any law enforcement department could take and keep as is or adapt to their specific agency and situation. And if you sign up for our newsletter at stalkingawareness.org, at the top of the page, you can click or tap and then be taken to a form to give us your email address and whatnot. And then you would get announcements about new resources when we produce them and webinars. So thank you all so much for joining me and the National Sheriff's Association today. This is me and who I am, our website, our social media. Please feel free to contact me because this is literally my job, to talk to people like you and get you resources and the support that you need. So check out our website, call or email me if you need, and of course, also the National Sheriff's Association has great resources and is also here to support officers in responding to victims.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Emma, for monitoring the chat. Thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.